All right, folks, welcome to the Grit City Think and Drink. I am your host, Jim Gow, coming at you from the great state of Washington on the other coast. Glad you could join us tonight from wherever you are coming in. I apologize for kind of cutting off everybody's videos and things, but as I mentioned to some other folks, we've had some issues with Zoom bombing in the past, and we try to make this as open to the public as possible. So no sort of registration or anything along those lines. So once we get going here, if it sort of looks okay, then I'll allow people to come off later on in the talk. But welcome. Just so you know, this is a public talk series that we do the second Tuesday of every month. It's now in its, I believe, fifth or sixth year at this point. I can't remember which one. And we have 2022 filling up. So as you can see, we're going to get a great talk from Aurelio tonight, February 8th. We get Michael Honey, who's going to talk about his work in the all the freedom work that he did down in the South. He's a professor here at Tacoma, so I hope you'll come in and check that out coming in February, and more talks to come. If you have ideas, anybody in the audience, if you have ideas for other speakers that you think would be cool, the one upside of COVID is that we can actually get people from wherever, since we're not in person, we're online. So if you have ideas from anywhere, just let me know, and I will try to contact them and see if they want to join us for a talk this year. So for those of you who aren't familiar, you can go to, if you didn't get to it this way, you can go to the Grit City Think and Drink website, which is down there on the left-hand side of your screen. And you can see all the upcoming talks, and there'll be links for getting onto those so that you can join us. The way that this works is I will, in just a moment, I will introduce our speaker. She will give you a talk to knock your socks off. And then we'll give her a quick break, and I will give away some prizes. We have Grit City Think and Drinks. Oops. Disappearing. Grit City Think and Drink socks to give away so that you can show off your pride. We'll ask some trivia questions for that I will make up on my own. And then we'll have a question and answer session with Anna, and you can play Stump the Speaker, ask her whatever you would like. All right. So without further ado, I will stop sharing my screen and we will introduce our speaker. Our speaker tonight is Ana Aurilio. She is the Federal Campaign Director for the Economic Security Project and directs federal advocacy efforts to advance transformative economic policies, including a guaranteed income. She has fought for the public interest for nearly 3 decades. As the DC Director for Environment America, and prior to that as the Legislative Director for US PIRG, Anna led a team of advocates and mobilized grassroots members and state networks to win policies to cut pollution, protect public lands, and boost efficiency and renewable energy. She has testified in Congress numerous times, been quoted in major news outlets, just lost my stuff, and was named a top grassroots lobbyist by The Hill. Anna is on the board directors of Voices for Progress and the National Environmental Law Center. And I know her also with her master's degree from Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So without further ado, thank you, Ana Aurilio, for being here tonight.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. And thanks everyone for joining this evening. Happy Tuesday, happy 2022. And thought what I would do first is start with a little bit more about myself, and especially how I came to know Jim. Because we both were grad students at MIT, and we were both studying the same thing, arsenic in the Arizona watershed, looking at the long history of contamination in an old gritty New England town that I actually had gone to high school in, and sort of where I got my activist chops, because kids in my high school were getting sick with leukemia. And it turned out it was coming from our drinking water. And it turned out several companies were dumping the toxic waste out and back. And on the other side of the chain link fence was our municipal drinking water supply. So in high school, we were just told not to drink the water. So we drank Tab with saccharin instead, probably not a great alternative. But several years later, when I came to be studying the watershed, really got to know Jim and have really marveled at Jim's ability to not just delve into the science and unearth and solve the problems of metals in the aquatic environment and lakes, but also somehow manage to do that in the most beautiful locations and get outside and do field work as much as possible in the most beautiful locations. So I think you win in terms of, just being able to go and have excellent adventures in the outdoors. I took a little different route. So I went south to Washington, D.C., which is also a beautiful place. With lots of outdoor adventures, but slightly different, because instead of doing field work and really discerning and unearthing the problems of environmental pollution, I started trying to discern and unearth how the heck we get things done in this country in the political process. So really thrilled to be here. And as Jim said, I worked for decades doing mostly environmental and some consumer and good government advocacy. Again, always trying to chip away at the halls of Congress and the White House and make change that way. And then a couple of years ago, a former colleague of mine called me up and said, why don't you come work on economic inequality? Because I had just been working on, trying to stop climate change for 30 years. So, why don't you try to now shift over and try to end poverty? So I'm now working at the Economic Security Project, and we're an organization that works to catalyze ideas and challenge the status quo. And the thing that we've been focused on, and my team in particular, is looking at ways that we can put cash back into people's pockets and looking at ways that we can advance the idea that unconditional cash policies are something that the federal government should do to really end poverty in the United States. So the whole purpose of this talk is to sort of take you down the road of, what is a guaranteed income? Why do we need it? And what's happening right now, both in your own city of Tacoma, Washington, and around the country. And, are we ready as a country to create an income floor and eradicate poverty in the United States, which I think is totally possible. So with that, let me dig into first the organization Economic Security Project. We were founded in December 2016. This was coming out of the Obama administration, and years of conversation around bank bailouts, the future work, how this all interacted with increasing, deepening levels of economic inequality, in part because of really runaway racialized capitalism. And at this time, the concept of a universal basic income was sort of bubbling up as a new and disruptive idea in Silicon Valley, but it was really distanced from working families and people who are historically excluded from our economy. So our organization really wanted to invite more people into the conversation, people who would acknowledge the fuller and richer context of this movement. And we really wanted to highlight that the concept of a guaranteed income, after all, was actually one of the demands of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the Black Panthers and the National Welfare Relief Organization. And it is something that's grounded in racial and social justice and in the here and now. So when we talk about a guaranteed income, what we're talking about separately and different from a universal basic income is we're talking about providing cash to the people who need it most. Universal is to everybody. We don't think everybody needs a guaranteed income. We think the people who need it most, the people who are in poverty or danger of getting into poverty. That's what we're talking about. And we're talking about giving it with no strings attached in a way that really offers dignity and self-determination to people. So we are really rejecting the patriarchal approach of telling people how, where, and what terms they can build their lives. And again, we're providing support that is unconditional, no strings attached, no work requirements. So unlike a universal basic income, a guaranteed income is really aware and responsive to inequality because it's focused on people who need it most. It's not going to lift all boats. It's going to focus on the people who need it the most. And it's envisioned as supporting and adding to, not replacing the social safety net. So as an organization, we realized that this was, a pretty radical idea, one that had been around for decades, but still pretty radical. So we've invested millions of dollars and helped raise millions of dollars to do on-the-ground demonstration projects. We started with the Stockton, California Guaranteed Income Project, and now happy to see that we've helped launch Mayors for Guaranteed Income. That's more than 60 mayors around the country, including Mayor Woodard's of Tacoma, and really started to launch pilot programs to really demonstrate the power of guaranteed income. So I want to talk a little bit about the results that we saw from the Stockton Guaranteed Income project, and then talk a little bit about a couple of other ones, and then go into what's happening at the federal level. So the Stockton Guaranteed Income Program was launched in February 2019 with former Mayor Michael Tubbs, and it gave 125 randomly selected residents $500 a month for 24 months. We also helped around the same time launch a program that worked in Jackson, Mississippi. That was the first guaranteed income project that was specifically serving extremely low income families headed by Black women who lived in affordable housing. So these projects and others have shown us, first and foremost, as you can imagine, that providing a monthly guaranteed income really reduces income volatility. The month-to-month income fluctuations that so many low-income households face. And, you know, as we're going more and more into the gig economy, and obviously with the pandemic, income volatility is a huge problem, right? If you don't know how much money you're going to have from one month to the next, but your rent is still coming due, your electricity bill is still coming due, that can cause, you know, enormous stress. And obviously, oftentimes people then, when they can't meet their monthly bills, turn to either high interest credit cards, a very high interest and usurious payday loans. So that's a huge problem. Second, and this will hit back at some of the people who say, well, if you give people money, they're not going to work. What we found, and our research, especially in Stockton, found that when you give people unconditional cash, it makes it possible for people to actually find the full-time employment they want and need. So for example, from the stories of some of the people who are part of that project, we found that, you know, people sometimes were able to either go from part-time to full-time employment because they could fix their car and have more reliable transportation, or they could pay for additional daycare, or they could get an unpaid internship for a while that then would get them into a better paying job. And most of these people actually were working 1, 2, sometimes 3 jobs. So the third finding is that people who received a guaranteed income experienced less anxiety and depression. They were also healthier and had a greater sense of well-being. And it really freed up time. So many of them, when they told their stories, talked about, you know, being able to take time to take their kids to the park, or help their children with homework, or go see one of their kids compete in a local sports event. Finally, you know, the guaranteed income really alleviated financial scarcity. It created new opportunities for self-determination, choice, goal setting, and risk taking. This is really important for everybody, and it's particularly important for people who are stuck in really bad living situations because of poverty. So it gives people more agency and freedom to be able to get out of those situations. So this work has really helped shift the calculation on what's possible when we talk about alleviating economic instability. So that's guaranteed income, the pilot projects, what we've seen. Fast forward from 2019 to 2020. And my job is to find ways that we can advance these kind of unconditional cash policies at the federal level. You know, where is the political support? Where can we get the votes to be able to do more of this at the federal level? So we had focused on things like the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit that were not perfect, but they were unconditional cash as long as you met the income requirements in those programs. We worked on modernizing and expanding those programs. Then the pandemic hit. And what we saw was people immediately especially the 40% of Americans before the pandemic who couldn't meet a $400 emergency expense without borrowing or selling something. We saw those folks immediately plunge into enormous financial precarity. And because we and so many other people pushed to get stimulus checks out the door, there were several rounds of stimulus checks that Congress finally sent out the door to most people. And these checks, at first, the first round helped keep more than 4 million people from going into poverty. Unfortunately, because of the, I don't want to say traumatic politics in 2020, but pretty dismal politics in 2020, people didn't know whether or not there was going to be another check or when they were going to come. So they waited 8 months for another stimulus check. And by that time, and they had expanded some unemployment insurance as well, but that's very hard to access, especially again, if you're Black or Latino or very low income, it's much harder for you to get the unemployment insurance benefits. So 8 months after the first stimulus checks went out, 8 million people went into poverty. So there was real desperate times. There was a third round of checks in December, and that helped bolster people. And then when President Biden came in January, they enacted the American Rescue Package. That had a final round of checks, and it included a real dramatic transformative expansion of the child tax credit and an expansion of the earned income tax credit. So I'm going to focus a little bit on that because we had sort of a year-long federal experiment in unconditional cash payments that were wildly successful, but not enough and not regular enough and not expected enough to really help people. And then what was put into place a year ago almost was a monthly expanded child tax credit, so that most of the families in the United States, including families that were so poor that they, before the American Rescue Package, weren't eligible for child tax credit because you had to have some earnings, they would get, starting in July of last year, a monthly cash payment per child. So $250 for 6 and over and $300 a month for 6 and under. And that was an amazing policy that got into the American Rescue Package. We pushed for it. Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro of Connecticut had been working on it since 2003. So there's tenacity for you. And what we found was that over the last 6 months of these monthly payments, no strings attached, reaching families that heretofore hadn't been eligible for the underlying child tax credit. And that was 27 million children whose families didn't get the full credit, disproportionately Black and Latino. So about half of Black children's families and about half of Latino children's families weren't getting the full child tax credit before this change. And that's compared to about a third of white children. So, this monthly expanded child tax credit actually created more racial equity in this program. And it also turned something that used to come at the end of the year as a tax refund into a monthly payment so that people could count on it to meet their monthly bills. And so what we've seen now over the last 6 months with, you know, sort of a nationwide 6-month guaranteed income now for children is that child poverty has decreased dramatically. Early estimates were that it could decrease child poverty by as much as 40%. There's still problems reaching people at the lower income levels because those people don't usually file taxes. So having a tax credit that reaches them, it's hard to get there. And there's been a lot of work doing outreach. But the last data that we have is from November, and it shows that 3.8 million children who were in poverty were lifted above the poverty line from the November payment alone. And a total of almost 10 million children were either lifted out of poverty or lifted out of deep poverty from those payments. Food insecurity, so hunger, was cut by 25%. And families across the income spectrum used these payments to meet some basic necessities, again, during a year that was incredibly precarious and uncertain. Schools were closed, then they were open. People didn't have daycare. There's just, women left the workforce in droves. So much was happening around people, and these payments created stability and a way for people to meet the rent and utilities and food. And particularly, again, families making under $60,000 spent the vast majority of these payments, according to the Census Bureau, which did surveys, on basic necessities. So that's pretty important to know. And unfortunately, one reason I'm drinking chamomile tea and not an alcoholic beverage to celebrate is that our efforts so far to extend that very successful child tax credit have floundered. And so even though I would like to be sitting here telling you, okay, we extended it, and now, rather than just trying to chip away at child poverty, why don't we eliminate all poverty, right? That should be the next step in this equation. Instead, I'm saying, well, we've hit a little roadblock. The U.S. Senate is quite a problem, and the fact that 0 Republicans support this program and other programs in the Build Back Better Act, and 1 Democrat seems to be all over the map on whether or not he supports it and wants to help anybody succeed, despite the fact that his state of West Virginia has 346,000 children who are helped by the child tax credit. So that's where we are right now. So I would say that the pilot programs have worked and demonstrated real success. The 6 months of the expanded child tax credit has had enormous, unprecedented benefits. We will keep working to extend it and make it permanent. And we'll also keep fighting to get an actual federal guaranteed income. All of these mayors around the country, there's a pilot program that just launched in Tacoma, where 110 families, not below poverty, but a little bit higher than the poverty level, will be getting $500 a month for 1 year. And similarly, social scientists will, collect data on how they're using the money and get their stories. All of those things just create a steady drumbeat of evidence and data showing that this is an idea that really works, that's transformative. As many people have said, the problem with poverty is that people don't have enough money. And if that's the problem, we need to give them money. And then, as Congresswoman Gwen Moore of Wisconsin has often said, and in America, we need to stop pretending there's not enough money. There's plenty of money. So that's the fight that we're having right now. That's the work that we're in the middle of doing right now. I'm hopeful that we can convince Senator Manchin and the majority of the U.S. Senate to extend the child tax credit and the earned income tax credit for another year. And in the meantime, we're going to work to build growing support, because there's certainly a lot of members of Congress who see the longer term gain, right? The North Star, which is let's not stop at cutting child poverty by 40%. Let's eliminate all poverty. We can totally do that. We can create a guaranteed income for people. And that's what we should do. And so these pilot programs will help convince people one step at a time and help people one step at a time. And in the meantime, we'll just keep chipping away at the, not the giant insurmountable obstacle that is the US Senate, but the very, very vexing problem that is the US Senate. So I don't know, Jim, are you going to give out prizes now, or should we call up Joe Manchin, tell him to stop being a jerk?
I think those are both good ideas, actually. So by the way, for those of you who are around, I did allow you to share your video if you want to turn on your video and wave hi to Anna. We will get to, question and answer. Sorry, there's a hand coming out of nowhere. We'll get to question and answers just in a second, but give Anna a break. Let's give a round of applause for Anna, please. That was awesome, and it was wonderful stuff to hear. So I do want to give away some prizes so that you guys can remember where you heard this, and so you can have something to wear when you go out and spread the word and actually do some door-to-door work for the organization. That would be awesome. So I come up with so the way to do this is you're going to have to chat. So make sure your chat function is ready. So the first person to get the answer, or at least close enough to the answer, gets a pair of socks. We will give away 2 pair of socks, but you need to know some information. 1, I need to know what size socks you wear. Let me know if it's women's or men's, and what size that you wear. And I will somehow determine whether you get small or medium/large, because that's all I got. So just give me your size and I'll figure it out. And
people are direct messaging me. Can you see the people that are messaging me?
Yeah, if you guys can chat to the hosts as a whole rather than to Anna directly, hopefully that works. So you can try it. I'm not sure if I can change this. Let's see if this works. I'll chat to everyone. Okay, that works. Okay. So yeah, so if you can just chat to me, that's perfect. Anna can see it, but it's not really, she's not the one who has to send the socks to you. Also, second thing, besides the size socks you wear, I need to know where you live, because it turns out we're not in person, so I can't hand it to you directly. So I will change it back to only being able to chat with the hosts or co-hosts. You can direct to me, send me just your address, and nobody else will know, so that they won't be able to send you socks as well. So here's the socks. For those of you who haven't gotten to see them, oops, they're there. Cool, finger drink socks. So here's your first trivia question. So what is, in 2022, what is the federal poverty level for an individual? For one person, what is the federal poverty level? Chat your answer to me. And you can keep guessing until somebody gets it close enough. Donald says 20,000. 19 from Lisa. 12 from the community impact. So community impact, you're close enough. You win. Hello, whoever community impact is. So you get a pair of socks. Make sure you send me your info on how to get it to you and your size. So that's the first pair. Second pair, because we're going to give away what?
You didn't tell them what it actually was.
Oh, sorry. The actual amount is 12,880. So I went with the first one. So yes, Kelly, you were close, but it was late and you were over. So second one, just to kind of tie into that. Oops, where's my mouse? So going along with the poverty level, what is, actually we'll give away 3 pairs of socks this time. So you get for either one, here we go. So I want to know what the lowest minimum wage is in the US for a state, and what state has the lowest minimum wage. $7.25, $2.95. Oof, that's low. $7.25 with tips. Nice. $8.50. We got an Alabama, an Arizona, and a Texas. None of those are correct. Keep going. Keep guessing. Anybody else got ideas? $7.25 Mississippi. We got a Georgia. So Kelly gets it for the state. Georgia is one of the 2 states with the lowest minimum wage. And I think the first answer I saw, 5.25. That's close enough. So Lisa Fleming, you get it. It is not Illinois, but it is $5.15 is the actual lowest minimum wage. And I did the math. If you work at $5.15, 40 hours a week for 52 weeks a year, you are below the poverty level for the US, which is definitely ridiculous. So but we're going to give you away something for knowing your stuff. So make sure, Lisa and Kelly, you send me your address on where to send it and what size it is that I should be sending you, as well as community impact. Make sure that you send me your info as well. Okay, thank you all. We'll get those out to you in the mail But in the meantime, we are ready for question and answers. So if you have a question for Anna, please go ahead and chat that question in, and we will pass it on to her. So chat it to me. I'll try to feed it to her so she doesn't have to pay attention to the chat function. So let me start it off while people are thinking. So Anna, can you tell me, so what was in the latest round of child tax credits? So what was the criteria, if anything, for how that was given out?
Yeah, so the one that just expired, basically it was an increase in the underlying child tax credit to $3,000 a year. If you have kids over 6, $3,600 a year. If you had kids under 6, and you could get them as an advance monthly payment, you'd have to opt out of that or get it as a lump sum at tax time and be paid out for 6 months. And the criteria were that you made less than $150,000 if you're married filing jointly. And I can't remember what the cutoffs are for single. But the big transformative part of it was at the bottom end. So previously, if you were making less than about $11,000 a year, you wouldn't get the full credit. And if you were making less than about $2,000 a year, you wouldn't get any credit. And so that represents 27 million children. Again, disproportionately Black and Latino, and also disproportionately houses headed by single parents, because those are the most low-income houses.
We have from Margaret Ann, I don't know if that's Meg. I would like to know if they are using any of the data from 1970s experiments, especially the one in Seattle and Denver, for that kind of data on how useful or how transformative it is.
I don't even know about the 1970s experiments. So Meg, where can I find more information?
Good question. Hopefully she can chat that to us. I don't know that either. Lisa wants, oh, sorry, that's other info. Donald says, which makes more sense to enact, a national basic income, uniform dollar amount for everyone, or have a state-based basic income that depends on some cost of living criteria per state?
That's a really good question, right? Because you could go smarty pants, we're better off. Some states, you know, if you live in the Bay Area of California, that's way more expensive than if you live in Wenatchee, Washington. But I'll say, just looking around the country, it's what's happening right now with state level politics, is it's a rough world out there. And so I think if we waited for all the states to do something like this, we'd be waiting a good long time. Not to say that enacting a federal guaranteed income is going to be kittens and roses for sure. We still got to even extend the 1-year child tax credit again. But I think that what we want to do is create opportunities across the country for everybody and make sure that happens. And I think the best way to do that is federally.
Cool. And it turns out our community impact person is Abigail Lawson. Nice to meet you. And she's the director of Tacoma's Guaranteed Impact Program, or Guaranteed Income Program. Nice to have her in the audience. And she says, I find myself curious about the best method for advocacy given our city level work. Does it start in the city with storytelling and mentality approach and trying to share our recipient story everywhere we can? Should we be focusing energy on statewide proposals?
Well, first, awesome. Thank you for the work that you're doing. So amazing, so important. And I will say that cities can be the laboratories of democracy, and that's where the action is happening right now. And that's why Mayors for a Guaranteed Income is such an important organization that you all are a part of, because I do think that, mayors are on the ground solving actual problems every single day. It's not theoretical, right? When the snow falls, you got to get it plowed. When things happen, you got to solve the problems. And so being at the front lines of solving people's problems and showing that you can do it with cash payments, I think is important. And then also the politics is important, right? Because you're showing here's how it can work. And this is why it's good politics as well. And, as I look around Washington, D.C. and see who's in office, so many people were mayors. So I think that's critically important. I think elevating the stories of people is really important, because again, not to go back to my favorite senator from West Virginia, but he has two anecdotes in his head about the child tax credit, one of which we think is not even true, which is that parents will buy drugs when you give them money, because every expert we've talked to in West Virginia says, actually, when you give people regular cash payments that they can depend on, and lift children out of poverty before they're teenagers, it makes it way less likely that they will abuse drugs. And to the extent that people want to get out of the cycle of substance abuse, often it's money that holds them back. So anyway, but having stories that sort of demonstrate what people are doing, or, like the finding that we found in Stockton, because that's another thing that we've hearing from Republicans is, oh, if you don't have an earnings requirement, people aren't going to work. They're just going to sit at home. And actually found exactly the opposite. So I think that's really important. So the politics, the stories, the data, and then sure, we should push for state level policy. And of course, the state of Washington has a lot of powerful members of Congress too. So they can all be learning from what you're doing and what you're experiencing on the ground, and turning them into champions is going to be critical to being able to overcome the inertia we have right now.
Thank you. It's also a more technical question, I think, from Abigail. She says, is your organization investing in any benefit protection measures for unrestricted cash assistance? And
yes, this is the question about, and this goes back to sort of the status quo, right? The existing safety net isn't enough, but it's actually critically useful. So we wouldn't want people to lose federal benefits eligibility because their income has gone up because of a guaranteed income pilot program payment. So there's ways to structure it that you can do it. And then we're trying to figure out how to do that legislatively. And Jim, you could probably connect me with Abigail somehow, or I can put my email in the chat, because there's folks who are working on the policy side of this. But this is exactly the problem. I don't know how many of you have seen the Netflix series Made. It's based on a book by Stephanie Land, and she was a young woman who escaped an abusive relationship and left with her kid and ended up sleeping in her car. And I've met her and I've heard her speak and I've read her book, but the story kind of demonstrates it really well, where the episode is, she finally gets out of this bad relationship, but she's sleeping in her car and she doesn't have a job and she doesn't have money. So she goes to social services and she says, I need to find a job, but I need daycare and I need a place to live. And the social worker said, well, you need a job to get daycare and you need a job to get a place to live. So she's like, well, how can I do, she actually used very strong language, even in that episode, because it's actually impossible, and people find this all the time, right? There are benefits cliff. If your income goes up by $50 one week, you might lose a daycare subsidy, for example. So this is where, we're pushing to just give people dignity and respect and not have to deal with the paperwork and the administrative burden, and just say, if the problem is they don't have enough money, give them the money, because it turns out they will figure out how to use it in the way that makes the most sense for their families. So I'll put my email in the chat though, because your question is an important one that we're trying to wrestle with.
Awesome. And there was a follow-up from Margaret Creasy. She says that the experiment she was talking about, there was a 9-year experiment of guaranteed income given during the 70s. It was called the Seattle-Denver Income Maintenance Experiment, SIME-DIME.
Okay.
So there you go. So it even had a catchy acronym, and it's interesting, it went on for 9 years. So thank you, Margaret, for that. Heidi says that the experimental guaranteed income in Tacoma was done in partnership with United Way. People were taken aback that the application required revealing a lot of personal stuff about religion and other private preferences. Do you know if that was just for statistics, or if that info is what qualified people for selection? I don't know.
I don't know the answer to that, but I bet you Abigail does.
I can, let's see, I can see if I can get Abigail to unmute. You should be able to unmute, I think.
I can. Hi, all. Yeah, I'm happy to answer that question. There were only 4 things that were taken into consideration to determine eligibility, and those were actually determined on a phone call with myself. All of the initial information on that application was all kind of a baseline survey for our researchers at the University of Pennsylvania to get an idea of who the recipients are, and they'll check in every 6 months with our recipients and get a feel for if anything changes. The religion questions were just to get an understanding of who these individuals are and the demographics they represent. It's a great question, though.
Thank you. Kelly says, thank you for your amazing work you're doing, Anna. You got data from your CCA study. Did you do surveys on families who got the child tax? Are they mostly spending money on food bills, etc., like you found in California or CA? I'm not sure if what CCA and CA is.
Oh, maybe the seed demonstration project versus the child tax credit. I don't know. Okay, so in California, the folks tended to spend the money on necessities, right? So things like rent, utilities, food, expenses. And what the household survey from the Census Bureau that has been asking questions of thousands of families of the child tax credit for the lowest income families, actually for families under $60,000 a year, they spent about 90% of the monthly payments on things that were in those same categories of necessities. And, right before like September, you saw a lot more families saying they, spend it on school supplies, back to school. And then anecdotally, you see higher income families, some of the stories that they're telling as well, they're spending some on what you call like the monthly necessities, and then also stuff like, violin lessons or sports equipment or outings for the family. But I will have to say, as someone who's now like matching up people's stories and getting them to the right congressional office to learn about the thing that to me, and as folks on this call know, I love to eat, the families who are saying, well, I could buy more food. And so we went from having 2 meals a day to 3. That's kind of heartbreaking.
Definitely. Are there any other questions that folks have out in the audience? You can chat them now. Oh, there was a question, additional question about should there be differences? I think you kind of addressed this, but should there be differences based on cost of living, maybe by state or locality? Or do you think it's hard enough to get everybody on board a policy, and that if you had differences in amounts that it would kind of kill it?
Yeah, so it's a little different. Like the first question was, should we just do it state by state, right? Just have states do it? And I'd say no. Well, yes, sure. The states that can't, like Washington State, plow ahead. In fact, Washington State just finally passed an expanded earned income tax credit too at the statewide level. So that's awesome. And other states are doing similar things. In fact, I just learned that Connecticut is considering passing a child tax credit expansion at the state level in case the federal one doesn't happen. So anyway, so that's all wild and wonderful. But I do think at the end of the day, this has got to be a federal program. And we've gone a little bit around and round at designing a federal policy and trying to figure out, could you have a, cost of living federal program, based on locality? It would be really difficult to administer. And that's one of the things I think that makes sort of a guaranteed income and even the child tax credit at some level kind of easier to administer, right? Because it's just, you're either 6 and over or under 6. That determines the amount that you get. And at the upper end of the income scale, you have to figure out the phase out and how much people at the upper end are going to get. But other than that, it's one-stop shopping, and it's just a lot easier. And And I will say, when we started this a couple of years ago, looking at modernizing these tax credits, we were told the IRS had computer systems that were from the Apollo age, and, that like they literally cannot figure out how to do this stuff, and they've been starved by Republicans cutting their budget, whatever. So I never let bureaucracy get in the way of good policy, but I will say that, like, at some point, making sure that the government can actually administer it and it can reach the people that it needs to reach, that should be a consideration. So I think it's a healthy debate to have. Because I do know, even as I'm lobbying the Congress and saying, okay, well, even if we created a guaranteed income, like what should the top income level be that gets the guaranteed income, right? Are we talking about people in the, 30,000 and below, or 50,000 and below? Or are we talking really just looking at the poverty level? And then you have someone from the Bay Area saying, well, no one can live on that. Or we are, right? It's so expensive. Or, New York City, right? How can you live on that in New York City? So, and it's very hard, as you pointed out, Jim, if you're making minimum wage, there's no city in the country where you can actually adequately live according to any standard of living. So it's very hard to imagine. So I do think at some point we should just create a floor and have it be one floor, same level for everybody, and let people leap from that.
Cool. Lisa says, thanks for all your work. When you come up against backlash against your initiatives, what is their main argument?
There's two. One is, how much is it going to cost? And the other is any version of the sort of racist welfare queen trope that Ronald Reagan really promulgated, and unfortunately Bill Clinton latched onto, to really take away much needed supports from families, which is, what are people going to do with the money? They're going to spend it on drugs. They're not going to work. They're lazy, blah, blah, blah. And, again, if you start to scratch the surface, and I'm sure Abigail sees this too, but in Stockton, most of the families that were getting the money, they were working 1 or 2 jobs, sometimes 3. And they had time poverty too. They had no time. They had no time, not just for spending with their kids, but to do things like become civically engaged, like tuning into something like this, or going to a city council meeting, or going to the PTA. So, as a society, I think it's our job to give people the ability and the agency to be able to participate fully. So there's that. And then how much will it cost in terms of the federal budget? And I just want to point out one thing: this whole fight over the Build Back Better bill, and it costs $1.7 trillion over 10 years, except they're going to raise taxes on wealthy people and corporations to pay for it. But that's a huge number, right? And yet 333 House members and the majority of the Senate voted for the defense authorization bill. That is 5 times that amount, and it is not paid for at all. So, as my friend Congresswoman Grenmore says, we have to stop pretending there's not enough money. There's plenty of money.
That's, I think you were channeling Heidi in there. Says just a statement of agreement that the U.S. does have enough money to support these basic and also universal incomes. And actually asked, do you ever see funds diverted from massive military spending to become available for better spending on such social programs? So, at least not in the last spending bill, from what it sounds like.
I gotta say, all politics is local, and those military contractors have somebody in everyone's district. So it's pretty, it's a pretty amazing operation they have, and you can start to see it creep into the narratives. Anyway, I read some right-wing, I don't want to say news outlets. I read some right-wing propaganda sources just to see what they're saying. And, already they're starting to make the case, for example, that we need to spend more money on our nuclear arsenal because China is developing nuclear weapons. And, we saw all this when I was in college in the 1980s, right? Where we're spending billions and billions of dollars on ramping up nuclear weapons under Ronald Reagan. And meantime, he was raising taxes on graduate students and taking away aid for the dependent families and the neediest families. So it's a problem. So I don't know that I see that. I do think that there's a lot of money from making our tax system more fair, and actually enforcing current tax laws. I mean, that could actually generate probably enough to pay for the Build Back Better bill, for example, if we just actually gave the IRS money and tools to enforce the current tax laws and got the money from people who actually owed it. So.
Last question for you, and then we'll let folks go. Margaret wants to know, is there any pushback on other funding programs such as childcare or Medicaid and stuff that goes along with the pushback that you've been talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends, right? So I don't know exactly what the arguments against childcare are, except I have heard some of the right-wing type folks talk about, they want to tell you how to take care of your children, or they want to industrialize childcare somehow. And then they want to rip children out of their families' arms, right? But at the same time, these are the same people that are saying, well, we can't give the child tax credit to people who aren't working or who don't have enough income. And so you're saying, okay, so you have to go to work. That means your kid has to go to childcare, or what? It's just totally inconsistent. And same thing with Medicare, but it usually goes back to, the sort of, spending taxpayer dollars and worrying about the debt that evaporates immediately when you have the defense spending bill on the floor, for example. And then, back to some of the dog whistle politics, like, well, what are they going to do with the money? And, they're not going to go to work, and et cetera.
Well, thank you very much, Anna, for a wonderful talk and a wonderful discussion. Thank you, Abigail, for showing up and telling us about the local program. It was great to have you. Thanks for everybody that came out. I did unmute you if you want to say hi to Anna. Otherwise, thanks for coming out, and we hope to see you February 8th for Michael Honey's talk about the freedom movement and his work down in the South, which is going to be a really interesting talk. And again, let me know if you have any ideas for talks you'd like to see. Otherwise, have an awesome time. Let me know. Make sure that you chatted your info about your socks if you want a pair of socks, and I will get them to you. Have an excellent evening, folks.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank
Great.
you.